let me start by asking you about today's topic. What does yoga teach us about leadership? Over to you, Prasad Kai.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. I think it became real long, so I was wondering whether there is somebody else behind me that I should look at. And the key reason why I talked about yoga and personal leadership is that ultimately yoga answers several questions. Who am I? What is this world? What is my relationship with it? And where am I going? What is my purpose? Several of them, especially with the COVID, and especially with all the economic turbulence and the healthcare related turbulence that we have been going through. People have lost clarity about their purpose, and especially when they lost several friends and family members, either hospitalized or they lost permanently because they are no longer here. The questions about meaning, passion, engagement, clarity about where they are going and how they should move forward have come about significantly. While the Western psychological paradigms, they can help us to deal within the dimension of the mind. But if you truly want to look at what is beyond the mind, if we want to yoke the mind to the body and be guided by the spirit, I believe yoga has a lot to offer. And the current times for people to take personal leadership, especially it is so important because people are working from home all over the world. And that means you have to be motivated intrinsically. You have to have certain order, structure, and discipline to be able to manage what you are managing so that you can show up in the right Zoom meetings, or whether it is some other kind of meetings, or whether you have to deliver certain kinds of things. So there is a lot about personal accountability that comes in. It is no longer operating, with business as usual, with somebody else managing your life, somebody else guiding you. If you truly want to grow, if you truly want to learn, if you truly want to shine, you need to develop the personal leadership characteristics. And there is no better approach to learn that from than yoga. That's the reason why I chose this topic, yoga and personal leadership, as the topic that we should discuss today.
Okay. With your vast experience in coaching and mentoring CXOs and leaders, where do you see yoga applied at the leadership position in an organization?
The key thing that I find yoga can apply is at all levels of the organization. Obviously, higher the organizational leader is in the hierarchy, they have more influence. Like we have in India a proverb called Yatha Raja Tatha Praja. So is the king, or so is the leader, so is people. Why is that? If a organizational leader at the executive level says this is what we are going to do, immediately many people multiple levels down the organization will stop doing other things. Like I remember one situation where there was a CEO of a large company, a photocopying company in the East Coast. When that person said, we have re-engineering management approach has become very prominent. In the past 2 years, we made so much of progress that we can do with 20,000 less people. We have become so efficient. The intention of the speaker, the CEO, was to say that we have become a very efficient organization. But unfortunately, as a result of that person's announcement that we have become so efficient that we can deal with 30% or 30,000 less employees. Interestingly, in next several days, many employees resigned. Many employees who could find other jobs in other companies really left, like a cream de la cream in the organization left very quickly, because they were all afraid that if the organization has become very efficient, that means the layoffs are going to come. That was what you call an unintended consequence. So the key thing is, as leaders are having higher and higher accountability and they are at the topmost levels, they need to watch not only what they say, what they do, and how they express their body language very, very clearly. So in, for example, in Indian tradition, we have a concept called Kaya, Vacha, Manasa. We call it a Trikarana Suddhi. We say leaders have to demonstrate in their action what they are saying in public and in private. Otherwise, people only do what they do rather than what they say. Why? Because it doesn't matter what the leader says. People look at the person and say, oh, the leader got to that position not based on words, based on actions. Another example could be a West Coast organization in the United States really looked at one time the diversity. Of course, through the last year, all kinds of what you might call diversity issues, race issues have become very forefront in the United States, as you know. When the diversity and inclusion became an issue, this large company with 100,000 employees began to look at where they are in terms of women, gender, race, and in terms of ethnicity, educational background. And because of that, they went ahead and made some significant changes to their organization. But unfortunately, when they promoted women and when they promoted, ethnic minorities or racial minorities like Hispanics and African Americans, the other employees did not respect them. They said, you only got promoted because of your skin color or because of your gender, but you don't deserve to be the foreman of this entire aircraft factory, or you only got your job because of, not necessarily straightforward reasons, because of the color or something else. So what people realized is it is extremely important in the current times for senior leaders, of course, middle managers, even, whether we are just being a retired people or housewives, or whether we are students or professors, we need to look at what are we practicing, and then seeing, is our words reflect what we are practicing? Is our thought process, is our feelings are actually connected with our actions? When we can bring that alignment between the head and the heart and the hands, then chances are things will move very well. And that is fundamentally one of the concepts. Like when you look at the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, we start with Yama Niyamas, and then we talk about asana pranayama, which is the asanas. Interestingly, asanas are about one line in 190 plus sutras in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. That is the one that has become most famous in the United States. But imagine if we could get to that level of clarity and the health benefits and all of them with one sutra. Imagine if we can popularize, and if there are students learning and students signing up to understand the yoga through Vayu, and we can really make the world a much better place. That aside, coming back to this, Yama Niyama work on our ethics and moral code. Asana pranayama or how we deal with the body. Then you look at the pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi will work with what are called the internal, like a unconscious and subconscious states of mind, and the clarity of focus, and where we want to develop, clarity. And ultimately, if we can bring samyama of all of this, then whatever I said about Trikarana Suddhi, acting, thinking and feeling and speaking, that kind of an alignment can be achieved through yoga, practicing these 8 limbs of yoga. That's why it is called the Ashtanga Yoga. The Patanjali Yoga Sutras are called. So all of that is possible. I believe like what you are doing through Vayu, the kind of programs, the kind of degrees which you are offering will help a large number of yoga trainers, yoga practitioners, yoga enthusiasts to get credentials to understand the underlying philosophy, underlying theory behind it, and take it to levels which are exactly what are needed at this moment. And I appreciate and applaud what you are doing in Vayu.
Well described, Dr. Prasad. Do leaders in top multinational practice yoga companies? Sorry, let me put it in this way. Do leaders in top multinational companies, do they practice yoga techniques, and how does it benefit them?
The key we might want to look at is yoga has become well known. Pretty much, I would say 90 to 100% of the population in the West or all around the world understand what yoga means, and where it comes from, and the health benefits. I think those are something which are known to everybody. So whether they are organizational top leaders or anywhere else, when there is a backache or when there are some other things in any and every health club, yoga practices are available. So I would say yoga as a health benefit, pranayama and the breath exercises as something that can work with emphysema, that can work with other kinds of breathing diseases, especially with the COVID, with the oxygen levels being something important to monitor. I think more and more people are beginning to turn to some of these yoga exercises, both breathing as well as asana related type of stuff. So now, can they benefit directly? Do they know that yoga can benefit them? Yes, at this level. But I believe these are only very, very, very small and peripheral benefits that one can get. When the leaders begin to understand and apply the yoga philosophy, yoga mindset, because ultimately yoga is a mindset. In Bhagavad Gita, one of the 3 predominant yoga texts, if you want to call, the other 2 being Patanjali Yoga Sutras and Yoga Vasishta, in addition to Bhagavad Gita, these are like Yoga Trayam, if you want to call. Just like we have a Prasthana Trayam, which talks about Vedanta. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Yogastha Kuru Karmani, there is a statement in the 2nd chapter. That means whatever actions that you do from the yoga state of mind. What is this yoga state of mind? Yoga state of mind is where, like again, if you take it to Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the first one is called essentially Chitta Vritta Nirodha. That means the mind, the various kinds of actions, the vrittis, the deliberations that are going on in the mind, whether it is about intention, whether it's about confusion, whether it's about total clarity and focus, or whether it is about lack of clarity and what they want to do, which job they should apply, which studies they want to take. If they are students or in the early levels of their career, they can think about, should I leave this company? Should I go to that company? Should I go do an MBA? Should I go do master? These are all the kinds of things that come. They are at the manas level. So my sense is developing focus, increasing memory, increasing productivity, increasing well-being, not just at the level of body and the breath, but bringing certain mental clarity, mental peace, and a sense of joy, a sense of being able to let go of one's own, what you might call a competitive tendencies enough so that they also can be effective in teams. I think all of these have got a direct implications to productivity and creativity of workforce in organizations. So my sense is, if more and more organizational leaders at high level begin to look at yoga not just as a physical exercise, but can understand the yoga philosophy and help people to operate from the yoga state of mind, which is in Bhagavad Gita, they call it a Sthita Prajna Lakshana state of mind. Sthita Prajna means a person whose mind is stable, does not get disturbed very easily by changes in the market, by changes in the stock price, by changes in the competitive strategy of somebody else, but to be able to calmly and quietly and thoughtfully reflect on what they need to react. I think so that means they can create a gap between what is the kind of cause that is creating the disturbance and what is the kind of effect they need to create so that the disturbance is taken care of not only in the short term, but in the long term. If they want to do it, the gap between the two, between the action and reaction, between the cause and effect, that's where the yoga state of mind can fit in. And I think if we can get employees and themselves to develop that, I think yoga can benefit large number of corporates, not only the corporates, but educational organizations and public organizations, politics. Some of them can have much better control of what they are creating in the world instead of always reacting to it.
Thank you for the very well explanation, Dr. Prasad. Last week, Vayu signed an MOU with MIT for joint research work on wearables. So how do you see the application of IoT and AI in the yoga space?
See, the key part which we need to look at is there is no conflict in terms of yoga with respect to science. As a matter of fact, what you call a root family that connected with Vayu, in India, the Vivekananda Yoga University in Bangalore and Dr. Nagendra and Dr. Nagaratna and Raghuramji, all of these people have really created a large amount of scientific, what you call papers, evidence-based, repeatable kinds of scientific papers on what yoga methodologies, yoga approaches, meditation approaches, breathing approaches can create. So there is a lot of research on what we can do. But at the same time, what is becoming extremely important in the current times is where can human being be replaced? Where can productivity be increased so that the man-machine interface, where can man do something? Where can deep learning, where can what you might call big data analysis and then identifying the patterns, some of those can be transferred to artificial intelligence approaches. And also, for example, my refrigerator broke last 2 weeks ago. But at the same time, it has got a intelligent connection, which it basically tells you right up front, saying, if you look at this particular code, compressor is broken, or this is condenser broken, or this is some other kinds of stuff. So by using IoT and by using some of the artificial intelligent approaches, whatever a human being can do, some of it which is repetitive, some of it which has no human value that can be added, can be downloaded to machines. So, I talk about, especially my one professor had suggested this way of thinking, that in the future, intelligence will have 3 different ways. you can talk about ABC of intelligence. A being the artificial intelligence, starting all the way from, if you have a phone, like if it's an iPhone, then you have Siri as a intelligent agent to assist. If you want to interact with Amazon, Fire devices, you talk with Alexa. Or if you have a Google Home, you talk about OK Google. So that means there are intelligent agents that can take over certain kinds of mechanical, non-value added tasks, non-creative, repetitive tasks that can be downloaded to intelligent agents and artificial intelligence. That is the A of intelligence. B of intelligence is the biological intelligence. For example, when I look outside in my backyard, the peaches, how do they know the peaches have to come around this time? How do the cherry blossoms come at a right time? How do the mangoes know when they need to ripe? Especially if, for example, because of the climate change or something else, if the weather becomes different, if the rain comes at different time, if the heat is not high enough or low enough, when do they know that mango has to sweeten to this at this particular time? There is a lot of biological intelligence in the biological systems around us. So the intelligence is not just human in nature, but the trees, especially where I live, not too far from me, there are redwoods. If you look at the redwoods, it's amazing stuff you can learn. And most of the trees in Henry Cowell Park, where I go for a walk, many of them are 200, 300, 500, 700 years old. So when you talk about the kind of intelligence and how, when they went through fires 100 years ago, 115 years ago, how they protected themselves, how they regrew, how they communicated the fire threat to other, what you might call trees. And I'm just talking about trees. You can talk about what you call insects. You can talk about birds. You can talk about animals. So there is a large amount of biological intelligence, which we need to also understand and appreciate so that we can learn. There are several artists and scientists for a long time. They have looked at these kinds of biological models for designing machines, designing computers. But now there is a third one, which is what I think the yoga and Vedanta and some of the sciences, I'm calling them sciences, even though they are called Darshana Shastras, and even though they came out of a religion. But what is amazing about the yoga and some of the Vedanta, some of them, they are not connected with religion. They are actually philosophy that can apply to any religion, whether you are a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew, or it doesn't matter, Buddhist. These are certain tools, certain processes, certain approaches, and they do not depend upon one particular name of the God or one particular type of God. And some of these are darshanas. They do not necessarily directly connect with the Hindu pantheon of gods. So from that perspective, by practicing yoga, by looking at the consciousness, especially in the business, people are talking more and more about conscious business, conscious capitalism. This has been one of the very successful books by John Mackey and Raj Sisodia. John Mackey is the CEO of Whole Foods Corporation, which got sold to Amazon. So if you look at Bill Gates, or if you look at many of the people, they do yoga. They want to learn more about it. And their consciousness has expanded beyond who they are. So if you talk about ABC, artificial, biological, and conscious intelligences, I think we need to work collaboratively with Harvard or MIT or IISc in Bangalore or ISB in Hyderabad or wherever, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, wherever and whatever research is going on. I think it is extremely important to create that kind of a Sanatana Dharma, which is the yoga is part of, and Nitya Nutana, that's why it is called. It is continually renewing itself to become new by partnering with institutions like MIT and Harvard and some of them. Obviously, Professor Khalsa, who is in the Harvard Medical School, is one of the very well-known scientists in terms of some of the kinds of work in the healthcare that he has done. Similarly, if you look at the partnership with MIT, it is with a scientist who works in a media lab, which is the cutting edge of technology at this moment. So if we can bring that kind of a partnerships to yoga research and yoga philosophy and make that available to your students to really think about the cutting edge of technology and science with the most ancient and holistic subject like yoga and Vedanta, I have a feeling you are preparing the students to be the best they can be and be able to face whatever they need to face in the coming years. So I believe that kind of partnership, like Dr. Srinath was here a couple of days ago in the Silicon Valley, meeting with luminaries like B.V. Jagadish, and meeting with some of the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, where he's trying to look at whether the Yoga University can have a center in Silicon Valley in addition to a center in Boston or somewhere else, so that there is a symbiotic relationship that can be established with the yoga research and the technological or IoT or AI research, so that people can learn from each other and develop new kinds of Apple Watches or new kinds of tools, new kinds of methodologies that will help us both in healthcare, and they can also help us in new kinds of devices. I think this is really commendable.
Yeah. Today, yoga is in every university and city. Dr. Satbir Singh Khalsa from Harvard University, a top researcher in this field of mind medicine, specializing in yoga therapy, spoke on this webinar a couple of weeks back. He mentioned that there is a 20% annual growth in the yoga industry. What is your view, and how do you see yoga going across the world and people wanting to learning it?
The key reason why 20% growth a year, in my opinion, in just my opinion, it's an underestimate. Reason for that is, if it is like a $40 billion industry around the world, just with the yoga studios, yoga clothes, yoga accessories, various other kinds of stuff, all based on asana alone. Imagine, yesterday when I went to my doctor and I was talking to him about something, he said in COVID period, at least in the hospitals that he is the head of, Kaiser in Santa Clara, he was telling that between 30 to 40% increase in trauma, in psychological evaluations, and motivation factors being reduced, all kinds of things are being seen. There is a lot of research that shows that much of the stuff which is going on between the body and the mind are connected with people being stressed out, people being depressed, people being anxious, and people not exercising, people developing certain paranoia or certain fear, people actually being upset with all these type of things. So these are, in some respects, what you might call, they can lead to lifestyle diseases like diabetes, blood pressure, all kinds, insomnia, or other kinds of things that are actually not related to our food, not related to our exercises, but related to the mental state of the mind. And much of that has not been leveraged in the United States or leveraged in much of the Western world. There has been a very clear differentiation between the Western medicine, which is primarily an offensive medicine. If I use the language of a good friend, Dr. Gopal Basist, who was a rheumatologist in Orlando, Florida, who talked about the defensive medicine is the Ayurveda, Unani, yoga, these are all the things. Whereas the Western medicine, which is very much necessary and extremely important. If there is a gangrene in some certain parts, you need to be able to do the surgery, or you need to be able to deal with urgent situation, whereas yoga can deal with certain long-term type of things and working with a defensive way. So that means offensive and defensive medicines, if they can work with a symbiotic approach, I have a feeling there are large number of treatments that can come into life that can help people to live a much more holistic, peaceful, and healthy living that is possible. Unfortunately, many of the things which we are talking about are under what is called alternative medicine in the West. But as you can see, in the past few years, the alternative medicine has been growing. So if I look at alternative medicine growth, whether it is acupuncture, whether it is Ayurveda, whether it is the meditation, whether it is the mindfulness, many of these things have become significantly more important. Just 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, I attended a conference in the Silicon Valley called a mindfulness conference, Wisdom 2.0. What was amazing is that the Wisdom 2.0 was started by a gentleman called Soren Goldhammer, who was a yoga practitioner and a yoga teacher. And he wrote the book Wisdom 2.0, and he has turned it into a huge, what you might call opportunity. And there were like probably 1,800 people in the conference in Silicon Valley, people paying $1,500 to $2,000 as a 3-day entrance fees to come to listen to some of these talks on spirituality and technology in business. So the key is to recognize there are opportunities in medicine, there are opportunities in what you might call well-being approaches, there are opportunities in fitness centers and other kinds of things, opportunities in psychology and psychiatric treatments. There are emphysema and health and asthma and some of the breathing related treatments. Considering that the healthcare is one of the biggest costs in the economy these days, I have a feeling 20% is a very conservative estimate in terms of opportunity for yoga to grow. So I believe, I think not only the yoga, but also the philosophy behind some of the other things like Vedanta and the underlying thesis behind like a Yoga Vasistha, which is the mental health, I think are going to really be a growth engines for United States to get control of health, well-being, productivity, creativity, and competitive edge for people here.
There are many leaders the world has seen who do not practice yoga. So why yoga and leadership?
The key you might want to look at is yoga has several principles that are very well connected with some of the leadership principles that people talk about. Whether you look at leadership challenge work, which has become very famous, Kouzes and Posner have become, big celebrities in this area. Whether you look at them or whether you talk about level 5 leadership, which came out of Stanford, and whether you look at wise leadership, which we ourselves wrote a book called From Smart to Wise in 2013, and it is continually being used as a textbook in several places still, of 7 years after that. I think there is a significant interest and there is a significant amount of work that is going on in this area. Why is that? Leadership ultimately has got 3 things. One is about essentially how do you communicate with other people? Because, like I use a simple metric. When people come into your cabin, if you are, let us say, their manager, when they come into your cabin, do they have more energy? Or when they leave your cabin, do they have more energy? That will tell you about your leadership style and leadership communication. Why? If leaders come if people come into your room with more energy and go back with less energy, that means you are actually sucking their energy rather than giving them the life force. Many of you might want to seriously think about it. Whether it is in families, whether it is in workplace, whether it is in churches or temples or playgrounds, when people talk to you, do you inspire them or do you try to impress them? Do they go away with more energy? Do they go away with less energy? Why is this important? Because ultimately, communication, how you speak, is more important. People remember how you spoke. They forget what you spoke. So that means how you do things, how you communicate is an extraordinarily important leadership skill. Okay, that is number one. Number two about leadership is what you call making decisions, making tough decisions, making decisions nobody wants to make, and they pushed it to you and hope that you can take that off so that their growth or decay will not connect to that particular decision. There are so many difficult decisions people have to make, whether it is layoffs or whether it is firing a close friend, or whether it is about telling somebody that you don't have any money, or saying that funding is running out, or nobody is buying the customer to the CEO who is so passionate about that product, keeps on trying to promote that product at the cost of every other product. To give that CEO, message that emperor has no clothes is a very, very difficult type of thing, and the decisions to be made about those kinds of products is even equally difficult. So leaders are paid for making decisions that nobody else is willing to make. Third one is about taking actions. Making decisions is one, then taking actions that are appropriate to making the difficult decisions is exactly the kind of thing that makes leaders, earn the big bucks these days. So when you look at, it doesn't matter what kind of leadership, whether you talk about transformational leadership, transactional leadership, or you talk about inspirational leadership, or you talk about team leadership, no matter what they talk about, it all comes down to how do I make decisions, how do I take action, and how do I communicate these difficult decisions and actions so that other people are behind me and other people feel like this is the best decision I could make. All of these depend upon the not only actions, but the mental state from which we operate. So you can take back one of the quote I gave from Bhagavad Gita earlier, Yogastha Kuru Karmani. So that means whatever actions, tough actions or other actions, if you take them from a compassionate state of mind, from a yoga state of mind. Why is the yoga state connected with compassionate state? You talk about in Bhagavad Gita, whatever you do, Advesta Sarva Bhutana, Maitra Karuna Evacha. Maitri and Karuna, friendship and compassion are the same thing. But if you go into yoga, where you talk about much more deeply, they talk about Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha. These are four things that become extremely important in Yoga Sutras. So that means have whatever you do it from a friendly demeanor, friendly perspective. Not always you need to have a competitive state of mind. You need to have a collaborative state of mind. You need to have a creative state of mind. The creative state is connected with collaboration rather than competition all the time. So competition might spur creativity of one kind, but in collaboration will allow you to multiply. 1 + 1 can become 11 if you truly develop an appropriate collaborative way in which people can do. So that is Maitri state of mind. Then Karuna state of mind is empathy. Empathy is very different from sympathy. If I can empathize with my customer, if I can empathize with my supplier, if I can empathize with my colleague, and I can understand and appreciate where they are coming from and what it took for them to get to where they are, chances are I will not try to squeeze the last dollar from them or last iota of energy from them. I will work with them in such a way it's a win-win for both of us. Win-win for the customer, win-win for the supplier, win-win for the employee is actually a very, very powerful recipe for organization to grow. And that is part of applying Karuna from yoga principle. Mudita means there may be sometimes there are competitors who are succeeding, but if you look at it and say, you know what, I could not come up with a product that will sell as well as their product is, but because we are both in the same industry, they are being pioneers and they are opening doors, I couldn't come up first and become the, what you call a leading edge product supplier, but I can come up with a better product. Look at, for example, Apple. Apple never necessarily always comes up with the technological innovations all by itself, but it got its reputation, it got its success because it integrates what is already there in the market. In, like, for example, when the iPhone came in or an iPod came in, there were so many MP3 players. There were so many phones. As a matter of fact, BlackBerry was extraordinarily successful when, and even Microsoft CEO laughed, Steve Ballmer laughed when Apple came up with an iPhone saying, we are really looking at how you can come and become successful in this market. Now, Microsoft is out of the market of phones. Even after they bought Nokia, BlackBerry literally disappeared. iPhone became something much more successful. Around that, even Android system came about. So what it means is, when you can look at how to integrate, how to bring it, you don't have to be the first mover all the time. So that means being happy about a competitor and learning from them is an extraordinarily important to become commercially successful in the market. And finally, upeksha. There are times when people do things which you don't appreciate and you don't like. At that time, developing certain amount of selective blindness, or what you might call a live and let live attitude, will help you instead of poking the bear. Or, if the Apple and Facebook are competing with each other, then you go file as many complaints about Facebook from Apple, and the other way, it is like a mutual destruction that leads. So sometimes people say, you need to figure out who is actually to be paid attention to, that is the customer and the market. So to support the customer and the market, both Facebook and Apple have to figure out a way to work with this privacy issue. And Apple can do what they can, Facebook can do what they can, but at some level, customer needs both of them. So what it means is, some of these yoga principles can be very effective in coexisting with Michael Porter's, competitive forces, or you talk about chasm that, some other people talk about. So all of these can be developed. Yoga, when you look at it from Yoga Vasistha, when you look at it from Yoga Sutras, or when you look at it from Bhagavad Gita and some of the Upanishadic perspective, there are so many principles. And even, for example, let's look at ethics is an extraordinarily important one. That's why they say, yama niyamas are more important. And if you do not master the yama niyamas, you cannot master your asanas. Why is that? When you talk about asteya, satya, ahimsa, or when you look at the principles and practices of creating an equanimity with the environment, equanimity with people around you, if you don't have that, even if you sit, in a particular posture and with your eyes closed, the environment will keep on disturbing you. So when you can achieve equanimity and peace so that they live and, you can live in peace, then, your ability to quiet your body first, quiet your prana, breath, quiet your mind, and withdraw your senses from the external stuff and concentrate, first focus, then defocus when you go to dhyana, and then get to samadhi states become a lot easier. I remember long time ago, a very close person, one Dhirendra, he was related to me. He told me, Prasad, this is great that you are actually mastering some of them. I think I want you to pay attention to Shila. Shila means your character, which is the Yama and Niyamas. So my sense is I can talk quite a bit on this because I'm extremely passionate. And I try to teach the principles of yoga and Vedanta, not from the religious perspective, but from bringing the consciousness perspective, making leaders to be aware, making leaders to attend to what is in the moment, which is now people talk about it as a mindfulness. Then look at what is emerging rather than the schedule that you have, strategy you have designed. You need to really look at scenario planning. You need to look at what is emerging in the market today based on what you have done, what competitors have done, what is being emerging in the customer psyche and in the governments, different governments. You need to come up with policies. You can't do 1 year, 3 year, 5 year strategies and say, market is going to do exactly what I expect it to do. That requires, again, presence of mind, and even executive presence, which people talk about, depends on the mental state of the mind, physical state of the mind, breathing. So all these are beautifully talked about, whether it is the Yoga Sutras or you can even go to Upanishads. Like Taittiriya Upanishad talks about the 5 koshas, Annamaya kosha, which is the body, Pranamaya kosha, which is the breath, Manomaya kosha, which are the emotions, then Vijnanamaya kosha, which is your buddhi or the direction setting intellect, and then Anandamaya kosha, which is where you experience the joy and the peace of mind. These are all various layers, if you can understand, that are part of your personality, which are subconscious and unconscious part of your personality. By understanding them, you can become an extraordinarily effective leader who can deal with whatever emerges in the organization, emerges in the market, emerges in the consciousness of the employees, attentively, appreciatively, positively, and work with them to resolve it. Why is that? In yoga, when you teach yoga, you tell them it is about, you need to own it. You need to be accountable for your actions. You need to be accountable for your asanas. And we tell very clearly, saying, if it hurts, don't do it. Yoga has to be done with ease and with alignment with the outer universe and inner universe. Breathe. Don't hold your breath when you are doing asana. So the difference between a gym exercise and yoga exercise is actually synchronizing your breath, your asanas, and then calming your mind along with that. So when the mind is calmed, breath is synchronized, when body is aligned, then there will be a lot less what you might call injuries at a physical level also. Look at, for example, Djokovic. This guy is playing tomorrow the finals in the what you call a French Open tennis championship. This guy has the least amount of injuries. Why is that? He practices yoga. He is mindful of what he does. He cooks his own food because he wants to bring his consciousness into his own cooking and some of them. And look at his ultimate high-level performance with the lowest number of injuries. So doesn't that show you, if a world-class athlete can manage his performance on the court day in and day out, practicing 4 to 5 hours every day, doesn't it show a leader that they can develop a lot of personal benefit, both as a leader, leading themselves, leading their workplace, as well as leading their families and society. I can give you principles of it. I can give you tips, like a half a dozen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if you want, at any time you want. But I just wanted to bring this up to your attention.
Yeah, Vayu is launching a product Vayu Shakti, focusing on corporate wellness that will lead to leadership excellence, resulting in improved corporate performance and growth. How do you think this will help, and what we are looking we can bring help them perform better using yogic natural techniques? What is your view on this?
Obviously, I need to know a lot more about what are you launching in the name of Shakti, and I need to learn more about what are the products and what are the approaches, all of that. But broadly, obviously, because you are a research institution, because you are an academic institution, if you can work hand in hand both with your students, because many of them may be people who are, from what I understand, they are in their 30s and 40s, I was told, who have joined the 40 of the students who are already in the first batch, who are there. And if you look at them, they are mid-career executives. If they, in connection with you and the wonderful rishis and researchers in Bangalore, in the Yoga University in Bangalore, Dr. Nagendra and Dr. Nagaratna and Raghuram and everybody else, if these people work hand in hand with your students and with the technology people and come up with approaches that will help corporations to develop more wellness, to develop more productivity, to develop more creativity, come up with products, come up with intellectual property that entrepreneurs can, license from you and develop more stuff. I think that would be a win-win for everybody. I'm looking forward to that. And I hope that is something that you can actually begin to think about, just like MIT or Stanford or Harvard shares their intellectual property and encourages, invests in entrepreneurs and develop entrepreneurs to come up with products. Without the Stanford University and some of the universities in Silicon Valley, I don't know whether Silicon Valley would have existed. So similarly, Vayu being the first yoga university in the United States, connected with one of the strong yoga universities in India, if you can develop products that will truly bring Shakti, truly bring power to both corporate sector as well as the academic sector. I wish you all the best in that.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad Kaipal. Before moving to Q&A, I have an important announcement to make. Admissions for the online Master of Science in Yoga has commenced. Interested candidates can apply on vayuesa.org. And I would like to acknowledge our official partner of this webinar series, Yoga Bharati, who is also our collaborator. We are grateful for the support from Vyasa LA, Samskrita Bharati, Heartfulness Institute, North South Foundation, Federation of Indian Physician Association, and the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. Now we will take up participants' questions from the Q&A box. The first question goes like this: many of the participants in today's webinar are yoga enthusiasts. So yoga perceived wrongly by many in the US as a very low-paid profession, while most of them do it for free. We have seen some become millionaires through yoga. What are the career options in the stream of yoga, and where do you see the future?
I do believe that obviously it's something which starts out as a low-paid profession. But just like in information technology, we were doing what they call a body shopping at one time. From body shopping, we began to outsource some of the projects to India. Then people only outsource some low-end stuff. Then we showed that we can do lots of wonderful things at a design level, architecture level, CEO level. So now we have in United States, large number of people, both from India as well as people from here, who are adding significant value to organizations. Similarly, as a yoga teacher, you might be operating through certain studios or fitness centers at a low paying job. But if you put your mind to it, and if you can begin to add some counseling sessions, if you can actually once you are qualified and once you get the degrees and once you get the certification, and you can actually offer certain kinds of high-end, high touch, high personal effectiveness kinds of yoga related approaches. Obviously therapy requires certification and therapy requires appropriate monitoring. If you can begin to do certain things, I think you can really see your income go up, especially because it's an exploding opportunity for moving in this direction. So I believe there is a lot of opportunity for you. You just have to become entrepreneurial in your mindset and look for opportunities and jump in and take some risks.
Yeah, here is one more question. It says, can you please elaborate? Yoga is skill in action.
Yeah. Yogastha kuru karmani, when you look at, actually that question comes about, right after that, the person says, the Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita asks, who is this person who can demonstrate yoga state of mind? How can he operate? How does he live all of it? There are wonderful, what you might call 18 shlokas in Bhagavad Gita, second chapter. They're called Sthaprajna Lakshanas. Basically, a person who is able to bring equanimity. Equanimity means when there are disturbing news, like, I heard today that a friend of mine, a doctor here, she had to leave to India in this difficult period and go into a dangerous place because her father passed away. Her sister and mother are still in hospital. And she has kids here, 3 kids here. She left all that and she's going to stay in India for several weeks to take care of some other. So when I wrote to her saying, how are you dealing with? She said, well, I just have to be equanimous. I'm a medical doctor, not only their, daughter and sister, I'm also a mother and a wife. So I have multiple roles to play. So I need to not get really caught up with the sadness at this moment. But, hope that, especially my sister and my mother will survive. So even though we lost my father, 2 out of 3, if they are recovering, that would be a good place. So the key thing is, how do you develop that equanimity? Dukkeshu anudvigna manaha, sukeshu vigatajvaraha, vitaraga bhaya krodha stitadi munihi uchyate. That means a person who controls their emotions, a person who is not reactive, but who is thoughtful in action, who created the gap between the instinct and one's reaction. If a person can come from that gap, in that gap, there is a yoga state of mind. And there are lots of shlokas that are there. And they basically tell you how to do this. Like a few shlokas down in Bhagavad Gita, the Krishna talks about, there are 4 shlokas, how you will decay if you don't pay attention. He says the desire, obviously, pravritti, nivritti, right? So the mind, yoga is about reducing the pravritti and nivritti. So where does the pravritti come? If I hang around, like let us say, if I hang around rich people, and if I have friends who take me to expensive restaurants and expensive shopping and expensive stuff, then I will never like any of the things which I do normally that are within my means. So why is that? Because by association with rich people, I have developed rich habits. So that means whatever is appropriate for me, I'm no longer happy. So I will develop constant unhappiness and constant desire for what I cannot afford. Sangat sanjayate kama, kamat krodho bijayate. When I cannot reach those goals, when I cannot have those clothes, when I cannot go to those restaurants every week, which costs 3 times more than what I could get in regular restaurants I go to, then I will become angry. Why me? Why God hasn't given me the money? I'm as good as they are. We went to same college. How come he makes millions and I make only so much money? Kamat krodho bijayate, krodhod bhavati sammoha. From there comes the delusion, I am as good as them. Nobody recognizes me. My boss doesn't recognize me. My spouse doesn't see how good a person I am, how good a husband I am, how good a wife I am, how good a mother I am. So what happens is this spreads. This is like a moha, means suddenly you have delusion about things you were very happy with. Suddenly, after you started making friendship and started developing this desire and anger, nobody wants to be around you. Sammoha smriti vibramaha. With that type of stuff, you will forget your roots. You will forget who did what needs to be done. You will start neglecting. Smriti brahmsad buddhinasaha. Then your decisions making capacity will reduce. Then you will not know what to do when. And you will actually start taking loans, or you will start doing things which are above and beyond your pay grade and above and beyond your means. And you end up with actually a lot of problems. Who knows, your relationships might decay, even in a personal relationships. So he says, buddhinasat pranasyati. So the idea of operating with yoga is skill in action. The idea is you have the skill. You need to know when to use it, when not to use it. Like even when I was in Apple, Steve Jobs used to say, 90% of the things, they are doable by Apple, but we should only pick about 3 or 4 of them and let go of the 86 or 87 of them. That ability to focus on what you can do, what the customers want, not because you have the capability to do it, you cannot take everything. So skill in action means your, what you call skill has to be applied when you need to be able to apply it. Like, for example, I'm saying all this on the stage. Now, if you look behind and if you talk to my family, they say, oh, that is the speaking self. But acting self, Prasad, is a very different personality. How much will you follow what I'm saying? That means over a period of time, I need to bring my words into action. And I need to bring that alignment. Trikarana Suddhi has to come. And that's what, for me, yoga is skill in action. That means. Thank you, Shamsundar, for this question.
Now that yoga is becoming very popular and many corporates are introducing it, in your experience interacting with top-level CEOs, what significant positive changes have you seen between then and now in the leadership team, efficiency of managers reporting to them, team outputs, and organizational growths?
See, I think there are several changes that have come about because whether we like it or not, I think the Indians, as Indians, we have found our self-confidence. I think in past 20 to 30 years, we are no longer actually having the slave mentality, having the constant fear mentality, having the self-confidence issues that we used to have in the 20th century. We are coming out of our shell. And there is a certain sense of self-confidence and a self-esteem where we recognize we are not going to war. We have never gone to war, but we have the intelligence. If there are opportunities, we will use it in large companies. Or if we are really passionate and aspiring, we can start our own entrepreneurial companies. There are unicorn companies in India. There are, somebody estimated even 10 years ago that the Indian entrepreneurs have contributed to economy, and by starting approximately $200 billion worth of revenues are being generated by entrepreneurs in the Silicon Valley alone. So what is happening with that is there is a lot of respect. Once upon a time in 1990s, people used to say, or early 2000s, they look at Indians and say, oh, you must be an IT person. Now they look at you and say, ah, you may be a doctor, you may be a lawyer, you may be a technology person, you may be a CEO, you may be a banker. So what does it mean? You know, we have actually in United States have become, as Indians, one of the richest immigrant communities in the United States. So where did that come from? We got something innately. We learned to adapt to the, situation, nature plus nurture, that is true. But I think the third one, the free will, which we talk about, swecha, swaicha, we are able to use by reconnecting to our Sanatana Dharma, applying it in an appropriate way to the current reality, we are able to prosper. We are able to bring value differentiation in what we are doing. And I think many CEOs and many senior leaders do recognize that many Indians have got a very capable intelligence if we can carefully guide them, not to become a pain in where, because we can really use our intelligence for what you might call pulling other people's leg or pulling people down. We can use it in a not so productive manner. But if we create a good relationship with Indians, and if we can create a trust and collaboration, Indians can be extraordinarily helpful. Indians can be very, leaderful. Leaderful means they're entrepreneurial, they're curious, they're accountable, and they deliver. These are some of the things I think people are developing confidence in Indians. And I think that is good. My sense is it doesn't have to be Indians. It can be, what you call a white female, or it can be a black female. It can be a Hispanic kid. It can be a Russian immigrant. I think when they develop some of these, it can really help them go a lot farther. And that's why, even though I took Vanaprastha, that's a way to say I'm no longer officially engaged, because retirement is not the right word. When I was a CEO advisor and a professor in a visiting status, I cannot say there was anybody gave me a retirement specifically, but I decided I will focus on nonprofits. Then there was a gentleman, Harikiran Vadlamani, who is the head of Indic Academy, came in and said, Prasad, for 30 years you have used this Vedanta and yoga in variety of applications in the world. You compared and contrasted with the neurosciences, cognitive sciences, and the Western management methods. And then you put yoga and Vedanta on par in terms of this. Is there a way in which you can develop some programs? Can we get consciousness research? Can we look at executive coaching? Can we develop a master's program or a year-long program on executive coaching completely based on yoga and Vedanta and Indian principles? So now, I'm being a mentor for Center for Consciousness Studies and Inner Transformation. We're trying to develop something like that, where online first, later it will be a one-on-one, where a global program that can help leaders to develop themselves and bring inner transformation, and can help people to get not just a coaching by any certification, but like a coaching 4.0. They can dig into themselves and do inner transformation so that they can be better leaders, better human beings, and better coaches. Some of them we are developing. So there is a lot of recognition. There is a lot of acceptance. So I see it's a night and day difference between 30 years ago and now. Of course, we have a long way to go, but I'm grateful for what changes that I see in West, especially United States.
Okay, next question. This is by Ashish Khan. Could you please share some highlights of leadership 5.0 at Stanford that you mentioned?
It's not called Leadership 5.0. It is essentially, there were I think Jerry Porras and Jim Collins. They wrote something about the leadership. It became a really famous book called Good to Great. They call it level 5 leadership. Level 5 leadership essentially can be considered as closest to servant leadership, where you have humility, where you have accountability. And if you look up something about level 5 leadership and Google Jim Collins or Google the book Good to Great, you will find a lot more about it. And I believe some of the principles that they talked about there, or Robert Greenleaf talked about as servant leadership. Many of these leadership models that are coming out are, for example, appreciative inquiry that came out of Case Western Reserve, or people talk about positive psychology that came out of University of Michigan. It has been influenced significantly by both the Mormon philosophy, in Christian religion, there is a particular group called Mormonism. Latter-day Saints, Latter-day Saints are the people they are called. They have used their own philosophy and Indian philosophy, especially more than Buddhism. The Hindu philosophy has been used significantly. I think there is a lot of parallels in terms of positive psychology and Hindu psychology and Hindu philosophy that we have come up with. So there is an incredible opportunity to develop leadership models, just like a positive psychology models and positive psychology books. We can write global bestsellers in the context of Hindu philosophy as applied to management, literally taking similar parallel things and similar problems and how we can apply that.
It's time to officially close the webinar. However, Dr. Prasad, if you have some time, can stay over and attend all the questions from the participants.
Sure. I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm amazed like how a vast topic on yoga and personal leadership are like so well encapsulated, and you explained it. Next Saturday, same time, same place, we will have our next webinar, Let Go a Path to Gnana Yoga by Mr. Raghuram. He is a yoga practitioner, and for the last 4 decades, he has been conducting corporate stress management workshop and yoga therapy workshop globally. Next, let us go to the next question now. Just a sec.
Okay.
What is your take on leadership at all levels?
See, leadership has to be at all levels. There is no such thing. See, there are two things which is important to recognize. One is manager versus leader. Of course, I should go a little bit back. Before managers, executive managers, management, they used to call administrators. The head of organization used to be administrators. That's why we call MBA, Masters in Business Administration. Then later it became management team, executive management team. Now for past 20, 30 years, we talk about leadership team. Of course, there are differences between administrators and managers and leaders, but how I differentiate leadership at all levels is, it is your birthright. It is a choice that you need to make whether I want to be a leader or not. What I mean by that is, for management levels, for you to be a manager, organization has to designate you that you have this responsibility, you have these people reporting to you, you have this kind of a P&L, profit and loss accountability, and from now onwards, you will be the director or a business unit head, or you will be a senior manager or vice president or CEO, whatever. So that means management is given to you by somebody else. But leadership is not given. It is something you have to demonstrate. That means there are only two states when you work. Either you become a leader, or to make it more jovially, you become a victim of other leaders. So that means if you don't take leadership in wherever you are, whether it is marriage, whether it is work, whether it is something else, if you don't lead, then you will be led by other people. And if you are upset that somebody is leading you, and you didn't have a chance, it is not that nobody gave you a chance. It is just that you didn't step it up. So leadership, I say, at all levels, if I really bring the Indian way of thinking, yoga way of thinking, leadership is an opportunity. You can take that opportunity any place. So in that respect, I would consider leadership is like a akasha. It's like the sky. Chidakasha means like the Brahman, like the infinite sky. So if you look at the sky, look up outside, you will see a blue sky. But if you go into the sky, you will find out there is no blueness there. It's actually colorless. Same thing with the ocean. Ocean is not blue. Whenever there is a depth, that deep depth, that becomes Nila Varna. That's why God, Krishna, Rama, some of them are considered to be Nila Megha Shyama. So that means the sky or the opportunity is representing infinite possibility. Anywhere you are, look at what other people are not doing. Instead of asking tricky questions to make them look bad and for you to look as a smart ass, try to see whether there is a way in which you identify what other people have not identified, and you can come up with a methodology for you to deal with that. Of course, sometimes when you raise questions in organizations, they will give you the responsibility to answer those questions. Why? Because you had the vision to see among all the canvas, you are able to see where something is mismatched. That means you have the capability to not only look at the problem, but also you have the capability to find the solution. But instead you say, oh, I don't want to raise my hand because people will ask me to solve it. You know what? When people are asking you to solve a problem, they haven't asked anybody else to solve a problem. It's an opportunity. If you can do it, you get noticed by the senior leaders, you get more responsibilities, you may get a raise, you may get a promotion. But you see, we need to think like that. So leadership at all levels means every moment is an opportunity for you to actually apply your yoga state of mind, your skill, to put it in action, and then actually create things. Yoga gives you ability to be creative, ability to be productive, ability to be effective, and do it with joy, do it with wholeness in perspective. So for example, I wrote the book From Smart to Wise. If any of you are interested, you might want to catch hold of it. And if you look at it, there we talk about from the Bhagavad Gita, 6 principles: Gnanam, Karma, Karta, Buddhi, Dhruti, Sukham. From the 18th chapter, from 20th slokas to 36 or somewhere around that, I took 6 slokas, combined it with the guna framework, 3 gunas, Sattvic, Rajasic and Tamasic. So 6 multiplied by 3. So I created a 6 by 3 matrix. Then I found CEOs and senior executives to interview, and that became a book called From Smart to Wise. Wise means being Sattvic Sthita Prajna. Smart means by a Rajasic competitive guy who is looking at what everybody is doing wrong and being the first ones to point it out. But in a positive sense, that smartness can be functional smartness. That means you are a person who want to be very good in doing what you can with a little bit more tamas, with a little bit less risk taking, or a business smartness, which is more Rajasic, where you want to be a Raja. Actually, a good leader is a Raja characteristic, Kshatriya characteristic. But only thing is, it needs to come from the heart first. You need to love your people, you need to honor your people, and you need to develop the trust in them, and they need to develop trust in you. If you can carry those people and help them to grow while you are there, it doesn't matter what role you are in, what level you are in, you can be an excellent leader. So there are lots of wonderful things that you can take from yoga and Vedanta. And I think probably we should look at, like, I know Dr. Srinath mentioned that you are going to create something in management also. I think that would be something which will be very interesting. yoga and Vedanta for management, a master's degree on that would be another specialization you may be able to think about developing. And maybe that is something, maybe whatever this Center for Consciousness Studies and Inner Transformation, like a Center for Inner Transformation is headed by Dr. Raghu Anantanarayan, him, and then talk to Harikiran Vadlamani. Maybe you guys can create a joint program that can be offered in India and in the United States. So there are lots of possibilities. We just need to open eyes and say, not as a you are a competitive, they are a competitive, but how can we collaborate and make 1 + 1 to become 11? That's what leadership is all about.
Okay, one last question, Dr. Prasad. Karma Yoga is one approach to understand how to do work. Applying consciousness experts, the person acts as a screen while the life movie goes on with an observer attitude. Please elaborate how these concepts can be applied to leadership principles with a detached mindset and still involved in work.
This is a very good question. See, the key thing, like my colleague Raghu talks about Sakhi Bhava and Sakshi Bhava. These are two things that are extraordinarily important principles that can come out of yoga. What is Sakhi Bhava? First develop, I am your Sakha, I am your friend. Even in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says at the end, even though he presented Karma Yoga, he presented Gnana Yoga, he presented Bhakti Yoga, Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, Kshetrajna, all of that. In the end, he says, Arjuna, I didn't teach all of this because you are a great warrior. I didn't teach because you are about dharma. But I did it because you are, and I didn't do it because you are my brother-in-law. I did it because you are my friend. You are my Sakha. So, Sakhi Bhavam is connected with what we talked about as Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha. I think those are some things which are important. So, you become a mentor and a coach. See, yoga teacher will always be a mentor and a coach doing one-on-one instructions and one-on-one help, which is exactly what executive coaching was that I did 30 years. So developing other people as leaders, one-on-one, paying attention completely mindfully. If I'm talking to you, I need to listen to you as if you are the only person on the planet. And I need to be able to help you with all my resources. Can I have that? Can I have that mindfulness? Can I have that presence of mind? Can I have that commitment to you? I think if I have that, then I have developed certain kinds of Sakhi Bhava. But while I am doing that, I also need to look at it and say, there is a way in which I can develop Sakshi Bhava, witnessing. That is when you can develop a detached engagement. The detached engagement becomes extraordinarily important because if you get caught with the role, Kartrutva Bhavam and Bhoktrutva Bhavam, I am the one who is doing it. So if I do generate profits in my division, how come profit sharing goes to everybody? All other divisions also get the money, but I don't get as much benefit. They lost the money, but my bonus is going down. See, that is the kind of feeling, Rajasic way saying, I did it, I did it. That is called Kartrutva Bhavam. Bhoktrutva Bhavam means I am the one who is enjoying. Oh, like I have a small amount of diabetes, but I love sweets. So if I look at it and say, I have the opportunity to eat the sweets, but I'm going to eat as many as I can, and then I'll take metformin. If I need, I'll take insulin. That's not a good way to take care of health. So the idea of becoming a witness, how am I behaving? I'm behaving as if I will never be able to sweets again. If I look at myself, I'm behaving as if I'm going to die tomorrow so that I can eat as many sweets as possible today. So there is a certain lack of abundance. There is a certain constricted personality. I'm behaving as if I have never eaten sweets. If I look at myself with that kind of a desire. So this is a Sakshi Bhavana. If I look at it and say, you know what, it's okay. I want to be generous. I want to be open, and I want to control my desire. and I want to be a Sthitaprajna, and I want to be able to appreciate that, I can, if I eat limited amount, I can live for a long time, and I can eat a lot more over a period of time. I think the idea, I'm not communicating what Raghu tried to communicate in his work, but I'm just trying to give simple practical ways to say this yoga, this Vedanta, lessons from Bhagavad Gita, all of them can be applied in every way. So to be detached but engaged, that is where you have to focus on. Let me give a very quick example before we end it. There is a small story that is told when you listen to some of this by, it seems there was a sage Durvasa who was known for his anger, quick temper. He had a lot of disciples who came to what you call where Krishna was living. And across the river Yamuna, they were staying in hermitage. So when Krishna Bhagavan found out that Durvasa is actually on the other side of the river, he invited him and all the disciples for a lunch on one day. Unfortunately, it started raining a lot. So by the time these Durvasa Mahamuni and disciples came to the Yamuna river, because the rain is so much, no boats were available to cross the river. So sage Durvasa looked at the Yamuna river and prayed, saying, River Yamuna, Krishna Bhagavan asked, Krishna Bhagavan, who is the, what you call a person, Nitya Brahmachari, who is a eternal Brahmachari, has invited us for lunch. Will you please make way for us so that we can go to his house? Immediately Yamuna gave way, they were going. But all the disciples were saying, what are you talking about? Krishna has 8 wives. People say 108 wives. Some people say entire Gokulam, all the, what you call, ladies in the Gokulam consider Krishna as their husband. What is Durvasa Mahamuni saying? He is a Nitya Brahmachari. It doesn't seem to make any sense. But we will ask him later, because right now we are hungry. They went, they ate. They were, there was unlimited food, all the favorite things, especially these brahmacharis and munis. They eat mostly the, seeds and fruits and nuts, all of them. They got some fantastic food. And modakam, Durvasa Mahamuni has been eating one ladu after another. And, in the end, Rukmini comes and says, one for the road, Mahodaya. He says, well, I don't think I can get up from the chase, but one more, fine, I'll take that. And he was eating that. And then the disciples look at the time and say, Durvasa Mahamuni, we need to go, because if we want to do the Sayam Sandhya, the evening things, I think it is important for us to get out of here. So they start going, and Durvasa Mahamuni says, I have eaten so much, and by the way, I have still half a laddu in my hand, I haven't finished. So why don't you guys go and do it? I'll stay here tonight and I'll come tomorrow. Then they remember that they cannot ask Yamuna with the same thing Nitya Brahmachari Krishna has asked. They said, what is the word that we can use so that Yamuna can give us way? Durvasa Mahamuni thinks for a minute and says, Durvasa Mahamuni Nitya Nirahari requests you to give way so that we can go and do the karmas. These people say, Durvasa Mahamuni, what are you talking? You are having another laddu that you can't even eat, and so that you can get up. And you are saying you are a Nitya Nirahari. And you said about Krishna as the Nitya Brahmachari. What is this? He says, we do what needs to be done when it is available, but we are not engaged in the action. We are detached but engaged. He said, what do you mean? Explain. He says, I have done 10,000 years of tapas without eating anything, without breathing, without drinking water. And when I come to the Krishna Bhagavan, when he offers the food, I am taking prasadam and I cannot throw away the prasadam, so I'm eating it. But who is eating? I am not the one who is eating. My body is consuming it. But at my level, whether I eat or no, don't eat, I'm not engaged with it. So I'm Nitya Nirahari. Same thing with Krishna Bhagavan. All these rishis in Ramayana time period wanted to experience, because Rama was a Ekapatni Vrata in Brahman. So they all wanted to experience to be loved by Rama. So they all became Gopikas, and all these people are all wonderful people. So do you think Krishna is actually, engaged with all of them in the same way which you and I think about? No, he is a Nitya Brahmachari. He is satisfying the disciples. So same way, engaged but detached is a sattvic karta lakshanam. When you are a sattvic karta, you can look at your actions both as an actor as well as from a bigger perspective. If we can develop that, then we are being truly a yoga kind of leadership, yoga kind of a leader. And I think with that, probably we should stop.